Welcome everyone, my name is Jordan Farmer. This is the Uncommon Ground YouTube channel where we are indoctrinating the masses, and today I'm going to be talking about the transgender community, transgender athletes, and the whole topic of gender identity within a political context. Up front, I want to lay out my sort of essential view of the entire situation within the political conversation. And that is that both sides, left and right, lack proper compassion for the situation that transgender people find themselves in, and they also lack the proper respect that should be given towards those people. Left and right, pretty much across the board, I think people do not have sufficient compassion or respect for transgender folks. And a little quick side note that I just want to get into straight away. I don't believe that children should be allowed to transition or be allowed to take hormone blockers or puberty blockers, or not just because they are a child, they don't have a fully developed brain, they can't give consent for many things, even getting a tattoo, so they definitely shouldn't be able to mess with their development during their childhood. This is slightly adult content, but if you don't develop properly and you take those, and your genitalia don't develop fully, if you wanted to take to have surgery later, first off, you'll never be able to have an orgasm, but you'll also not be able to have a transition surgery because you have to have some tissue to start with for that. So, there is some correlation between, and Heather McDonald has a book on this. I believe it's Heather McDonald. There is some correlation between very, very, very empathetic or compassionate teenagers that when their friend is transgender or is struggling in these areas, sort of they can they will if you guys are going through the same experience together, you can bond together, and there's this sort of forced bonding that can take place through adopting or saying you're transgender too, and there's a lot of complicating and troubling factors on that front. So just simply put, I don't think under any circumstances it ever advisable or not abuse of that child to mess with their development in any way. Once they're an adult, if they wish to get whatever surgeries or hormonal treatments that they want, ideally, in a well developed healthcare industry, it would be relatively cheap to transition and to live that lifestyle, particularly if we're a richer country altogether, and with lower cost of living, like, money and resources are, offer opportunity. So we could definitely get to a place where it could be cheap enough if you choose to go that route. But you should be an adult when you make that decision for yourself. Anyways, so the compassion and respect points, I'm just going to go through a quick overview of the right and the left. I'll start with right-wingers. Right-wingers are more likely to make open jokes or make a mockery of transgender people, or do skits like Steven Crowder with the tranny version of Tranny Bane. And I would never ever do that kind of stuff. I do think that transgender people should be respected enough to for us to understand that we can make fun of them. I think everyone should be allowed to be made fun of. I think we're all flawed human beings, so being able to laugh at that common hilarity of our circumstances and the fact that things don't quite line up, and sometimes it's funny. Everyone should be able to participate in that, and that's part of growing and developing as a person to a certain degree. There's specific types of humor that certain people like and certain people don't. You have to read that towards the individual, so you always have to be considerate and compassionate as well, when you're considering how you're making jokes, what kind of jokes you're making. But so on that front, right-wingers it's kind of obvious the lack of compassion or the lack of respect that right-wingers tend to show. The term mental illness can sometimes, it seems like the sentiment is trying to weaponize and maximize that term mental illness when talking about this from the right-wingers. So some of that makes me uncomfortable. And then the bathroom stuff, I think that children should be monitored and watched after when they're small in public bathrooms, no matter what, because maybe most predators are men, but some are women, and at the end of the day, like, a man can sneak into the women's restroom when no one's there and then still, do stuff. So you want to watch over your children, and that's your responsibility as a parent and an adult. We all need to be on the lookout for predators and for people that are, grooming or crossing barriers, crossing inappropriate barriers with children. We need to be on the lookout for that. People that, touch them when they don't want to be touched. In terms of the actual bathroom issue being solved, I consider it kind of a petty issue. Either we have a co-ed solution where we just have bathrooms that everyone can go into, and I would like that, because hopefully that would mean that the bathrooms that I get to use aren't disgusting, because men will kind of have to learn to keep it clean, so that because they're gonna, I don't know, I would assume that under those circumstances men would increase their cleanliness if they know they have to share bathrooms with women. And also, on the other hand, like, you have a lot of good stuff. Anyways, you could have, I've seen gender neutral bathrooms, and then I've just seen, for everybody bathrooms, any of that kind of stuff. I think that's cool. I don't think we need national, well, I either way, it's not the biggest deal. Again, you need to watch over your kids, and as long as you're doing that, we won't have any problem. There can be transgender people that are predators. That's, to think that that's not possible, I think, is being naive. You deny people their humanity when you deny how good and how bad they can be. And everyone is capable of that. Not everyone is capable of that, but you can never determine based off of anything other than the actual behavior of the person, and behavioral warning signs. You can never know who's going to be a predator in that sense. That's why you have to be on the lookout. We all have to be on the lookout. Anywho, so that's sort of my summary of my critiques of the right. I think right-wingers kind of understand where they're at. So if you're hearing this, compassion and respect and dignity, recognizing the dignity of those people, very important. Okay, now I'm getting to the left-wingers. I want to beat up on you guys a little bit. In our society, we both guard against the word mental illness. We don't want to admit to having mental illnesses, or we think that if you say someone else is mentally ill, that is automatically an insult. And then you have some people who weaponize it and make it to try to be an insult. So some of the concerns there are warranted. But in my opinion, we are not open enough about it. We are not comfortable enough talking about it. I have suffered from mental health issues throughout much of my life. It's an ongoing struggle, and you learn to get better, and certain medicines and certain types of things can help. But it's very human to have mental challenges, and when they exceed a certain level, they can breed dysfunction or just be overwhelming, too much to overcome without the proper tools, and they show up as, in very troubled folks. And there's many ways to define mental illness, but to me, I sort of define it this way. I would say it is when your perceptions of reality are both mismatched with reality or disconnected, so you're not picking up the right things, and disconnected in the sense that you're picking up certain signals that are entirely wrong, and so your ability to make sense of the world is disrupted because of these disconnections, essentially, between reality and the way you're perceiving things. Because if you expected everything and were oriented positively towards everything happening in your life, it's highly unlikely you're going to have a lot of mental health issues. It just, that seems kind of like that's what mental health looks like, is when you're perceiving the world accurately and you're emotionally stable throughout it. And so mental illness is when you're not perceiving it accurately, there's a disconnect, and it's when you're being traumatized by that disconnect. Because if it's just a disconnect, you're just wrong. But if it's a disconnect that's traumatizing you, and it's deep in some way in your psyche, that is when you have manifestations of bad behavior or of trauma that is coming from the mental illness, coming from that disconnect. So anyways, all people with gender dysphoria, or who specifically are transgender, and their belief psychologically and in their belief system, in their core inside essence of who they are, they believe they are one thing over here, but the physical reality and how people treat them, how people perceive them, and even as they try to, pass, if they're still found out or treated like what they are, that disconnect is extremely traumatizing. And so like a cisgendered person, or just someone like me, who I identify and feel like a man, and I was born into a male body, so I don't have any tension. It's just, psyche and reality are in alignment, resting comfortably next to each other. There's no issues. The transgender, gender dysphoria circumstance is fundamentally a disconnect between the psyche and reality, and it's very traumatizing when it's at the identity level, in something as rooted in how you feel as womanhood or manhood. Feeling disconnected from that, or feeling out of alignment with that. I can understand that is very traumatizing. When I felt like out of alignment with my own being, not on that level, not that deeply, but out of alignment with who I was trying to be, or who I thought I should be. And I recognize that there's a lot of stress that comes from that, so it makes sense. And so my critique of the left mainly is that they don't have sufficient compassion for that circumstance. They don't have sufficient respect for that person, because they tend to treat them like a baby or like a child who is not capable of handling jokes, who is not capable of developing a certain amount of self-assurance and self-comfort, and someone who not can fight for themselves, but someone who they don't respect their ability to handle their situation on their own to a certain degree. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but I'll have to think more about that. But definitely the left-wingers would be offended by the idea, or by the use of the term mental illness, probably, to describe someone who's transgender. And that's because, I'm going a little deep here, the cultural revolution we're currently in is in the adoption of what I call the religion of niceness. It's sort of the principle of, if you have nothing nice to say nothing at all. Well, that insulates you from the truth to a certain degree, because if you believe that if the truth is not nice, it should not be uttered, then you're going to be disconnected from the truth. You're going to be disconnected from reality. And much of the left has sort of adopted this value system that's completely founded on being nice to the right people. If you're a Republican, or if you're a white person who's a Republican, or you know, they're a Trump supporter or Trump himself, they can be very, very vicious and cruel and bullying, make fun of their weight, make fun of their, penis size or whatever. Like all the stuff that they would be flabbergasted or, up in arms about if it was coming the other way to the people they care about being nice to. When it's those not those people that look that way, which is kind of racist, or kind of sexist, or kind of whatever is the judgment or the drawing line, politicalist, partisan, they'll be vicious, nice, vicious. The religion of niceness to the people that are heathens and beyond redemption within the religion of niceness. And there can be no forgiveness if you have. There can only be forgiveness if you double down on the niceness, and you double down on even if what you said was true and important. If what you said was mean, you have to apologize because it was mean. So they adopt this sort of religion of niceness on the left, where if it's perceived to be mean or not nice or offensive to a transgender person, not even if it is, but if it is perceived to be, that is a huge, tremendous problem, and you shut down the conversation. And so out of that grows a lack of recognition of the direness of transgender people's situation. Like, you have to take the fact that they're struggling seriously enough to understand that it's a mental illness, and seriously enough to understand that just being nice to someone who's mentally ill and just playing into their perceived delusions. And perceived delusions is when I mean, if I was a transgender person, and I say I was a guy, and then I transitioned to female, and I wanted to be called a woman, I wanted to be called she, I would not think I'm a woman, and I would never claim to be. I would want to be forward about the fact that I wouldn't want to be hung up on it. I would just want to live my life as a person, but I wouldn't tell myself I'm a woman, because I feel like I would be lying to myself. I feel like I would be deluding myself. I can just act as a woman because that's the way I want to act, and that's the way I feel, and that's okay. I don't need to make claims about reality or the truth that I know are wrong to make myself feel good, to be nice to myself. I would hope, at least. I understand, again, that the identity disjoint, misalignment, it's a tremendous, tremendous pain and struggle to carry, and I'm not lost on that. So I don't want to seem cruel, because I'm not trying to be cruel. So that was 18 and a half minutes of so because it's a mental illness, what seems to treat the mental illness, this mental illness it's serious because the suicide rate, and this is completely divorced from the transition before or after. So whether their physical reality is even closer to being aligned with their perceived reality, that doesn't seem to help them, because it's a reality and a misalignment that until they come to terms with it, they won't be able to actually deal with and settle into themselves. So I had a human sexuality professor who I was a big fan of, and she was very brilliant. And one of the things she talked about was, in the psychiatric literature, if you're a transgender person, your best course of treatment, not transitioning, your best course of treatment is not making sure that you remove yourself from people that are mean to you. The best course of action, or the best course of treatment, is self-acceptance counseling. Trying to be at peace with yourself, and trying to be at peace with your position in life where you're at now. The issue is this disconnect. If you can learn to be at peace with it, whether you choose to transition or not, that puts you in a much better place emotionally, and you're going to be in a much more healthy place mentally to make that decision to transition once you've learned to accept yourself as you are, regardless of where you're at in your physical reality. Because what makes you valuable as a human being is not your manhood or womanhood. There's some biological programming that sort of has helped reinforce what the average man and average woman looks like, thinks like, what their skill sets are, what their natural interests are. There's a lot of stuff that can sort of biologically emerge into stereotypes about men or women that are true. So it's like a manhood or womanhood can have certain deep sort of real things about them. So being at peace with that and embracing that and understanding that there's not just toxic masculinity and perfect pristine femininity, but there's toxic femininity and healthy masculinity, and we need to all be striving to be healthy human beings, which really a lot of healthy behavior and not healthy behavior has nothing to do with the sexes or with like whether you're not nice enough or whether you're not in tune with the truth. That's a problem. Inevitably, if you're trying to get along with most people, or you're trying to just express your compassion to the right people, anywho, going beyond that compassion and respect critiques, I want to get into some policy. So in terms of once you're an adult, once you're 18 years old, ideally you would have access to psychiatric medication if you need it. Ideally you would have already had access to counseling, but once you're 18 you should be able to do whatever you want in terms of cosmetic surgeries and transitioning your body, as long as it's not intentionally self-mutilation or intentional chopping off, unnecessary amputation or things like that, which is, I know it's not related, while I was on that topic, I wanted to sort of talk about those, mention those. Anyways, on the transgender athletes front, I think that the sports that are separated by sex are separated by sex for a reason, especially like combat sports like boxing or mixed martial arts. Just because the muscle mass, hip and shoulder structure, bone density, and testosterone of men, on average, and there's some crossover. There's lots of women who are stronger than lots of men, but on average, men are superior athletes. So when you're talking about the top 1% on each side, the top 1% on the men's side are way more athletic and dynamic and mechanically advantaged than the women in the top 1%, even if the women in the top 1% can compete with like the top 5% of the men's side fairly well. So when you're talking about transgender people and athletes that are sort of blurring that traditional barrier, so again, you got to understand, look, I get that, feeling like a weirdo, feeling like you're unusual, I totally get that. So on one hand, you have to learn to accept yourself, and then on the other hand, you have to learn to accept that you're an outlier, you're weird, and that there's things that are about you that other people, that's not the same as other people, and so you might stand out, you might just be weird, and I think weirdo or weird is a good thing. Creep is a bad thing, but being a weirdo, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. In many ways, it just makes you interesting. But when you're in a position where you're an outlier, you need to recognize that. So when you blur the lines, when these traditional categories of men and women are in sports and segregated, and it's because the men would have an advantage on average over the women, so much so that women wouldn't get their fair shake in competition, because competition is about fair sport and even competition between you and your opponents. And if you had men and women in like wrestling or certain physical sports, lots of women would be successful, but the best men would keep all the women out of the top 10 almost all the time. And just to the point where it's unfair to the women. They should be allowed to compete and get silver medals when they're the second best in their fair class athletically. And athletics has so little to do with the meaning of life that getting hung up on being smaller and weaker on average as a woman, you just got to deal with that. And as a man, all men have to make the choice of being a protector of women and children, or being a predator, and there is no in between. If you default and just hang back, you're giving tacit approval to the predator. So men, you have to make that decision, and anyone has to make that decision. But I think because of that size difference and that fundamental sort of position in bullying and violence that men find themselves in, the most capable of the people that are the most capable of violence are men, on both sides, in defense of people and in victimizing people. And so you can't, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. You have to fight fire with fire. All those cliches. It should be obvious, but we get hung up on some stuff in our current society, and so I wanted to address those. So my official policy is that I think transgender women will have to compete in their own leagues, because not only are they coming from that superior athletic position and frame, the drugs that they get on, like estrogen and stuff, to make them more feminine, actually preserve the bone density and some of the advantages. They have to get on artificial testosterone because they're shutting down their natural production of it, but you still need some as a woman. So they're getting artificial drugs and hormone stuff and steroids. That's what a steroid is largely. It's usually hormones or hormone affecting drugs. You can't, if steroids are illegal, then a transgender woman who's on steroids should be not allowed to compete with women that are just not on any gear. And that's, that just for the chemical reasons shouldn't be allowed. If a transgender man, so going from female body to male outward behavior, wants to compete amongst men, or would be more comfortable competing amongst men, I think they should be allowed to compete amongst men. If, it's going to make athletes uncomfortable, and, if you're uncomfortable wrestling a girl, and you would then be uncomfortable wrestling a girl who believes she's a man, I don't judge you as much as other people would for that. But at the same time, I think, if you want to let them compete and see if they can actually hang, then it's all good. They'll be on testosterone if they are actually hormonally changing. So there's the steroid issue there again. And if you're actually transitioning and going on hormones, you have the issue, if you're a transgender man, you can't compete with the women either because you're now on hormones, so you're going to have an advantage. And so I think there should be either, again, another league entirely for them to compete in so that they can get to the world championships against their proper competitors, true equivalents athletically. And then, or transgender men, I think, can sometimes just be allowed to compete against men. I feel like I pretty much covered everything. That was quite a bit. It's a sensitive topic. I wanted to do it justice and take my time. So I hope you found this informative, and like and subscribe, share, and I'll see you tomorrow. Enjoy the 2 videos today. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.